Joe, I'm just checking, can you hear me?
Mute off.
I can hear you, Larissa.
Good evening, everybody. I welcome everyone to the full council meeting, including members, officers, and any members of the public who may be attending remotely. Please be advised that the meeting will be live streamed and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the council's data retention policy. The recording of the meeting may be added to the council website. The following staff are in attendance: the Chief Executive remotely, Monitoring Officer, Director of Resources, Head of Finances and Procurement, Contentious Team Leader, and Democratic Services. And I would like to invite the leader of the Conservative group to pay tribute to former councillor and Mayor of Swale, Honorary Alderman Colin Prescott, who sadly passed away recently.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to allow my deputy leader to pass these words, if that's acceptable to you.
That's fine, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's difficult to do justice to Colin in a few short words, but I will do my best. Colin Prescott was truly part of the Swale family, and he and Pamela had a long association with local government. They worked in the banking sector at local branch level, and before moving to Oxfordshire, Pamela was a Swale Borough Councillor. Following their move from Kent, Colin served as a councillor on Cherwell District Council based in Banbury. On their return to North Kent, it was Colin who was elected as ward councillor for East Downs in 1992, standing down at the last election after 27 years of distinguished service. During that time, Colin was twice mayor, first in 2004-05 and again in the 2017-18 civic year. It is a shame that so many of the current members did not have the opportunity to get to know Colin, as he stood down in 2019 due to issues with his health. As well as being an experienced and effective councillor, he was a real character with a good sense of humour and could be relied on to liven up any council meeting. I often wonder if he had ever been involved in amateur dramatics. In meetings, he would sit, normally the end seat in the back row, with his packet of salt-free crisps and Diet Coke. He had a marvellous stage whisper, and every so often, "Well, I don't agree with that," could be heard on the other side of the chamber. Whilst he was mayor, he was a stickler for correct protocols and manners, asking members to be appropriately dressed when the mace was in the chamber and not to move around the chamber whilst other members of the public were speaking. At local elections, Colin would often have one of the best majorities in Swale. And it was not until I started visiting some of his 8 parish councils that I realised just how popular and highly regarded Colin was amongst his local residents. Colin was a great champion for Swale. He will be greatly missed, and we send our condolences to Pamela, his family, and his friends. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Simmons. I'd like to invite the leader to speak, please.
So, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I did actually pay tribute to Colin at the cabinet meeting a couple of weeks ago, and I feel very honoured I've been asked to speak at his funeral. You heard from David that Colin went back a long way, so I'm going to ask somebody who also goes back a long way to pay tribute on behalf of the coalition. Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, Colin and I, obviously I was here before him, but yeah, don't know where the years have gone. Colin was, obviously he was a Tory, but he was very pragmatic and he was also very collegiate. He very much, especially on planning, made sure that everyone was on board. If you had an issue in your area, then he'd quite happily support a site meeting with his group, as we did with when one of them wanted one. And it was very much how can we make our decisions based on the needs of the community, obviously within planning, because there are rules and regulations. But he was very much it's not about me, it's about us. And he was also your whip. A lot of you won't know that, obviously, but he was also the chief whip of the Conservative group. And a couple of occasions he did report back to me on areas where perhaps some people had got out of their pram, they were so new, but they were soon put back in nicely, because that's the way he did it. He asked me, and this is where he is collegiate, he asked me in his second term of office to do a reading at his Christmas carol service. I don't do social events. It's just one of those things. And I'd never been to any mayor's do's at all. So I did agree to go to the carol service and do a reading. And by Christ, did I get it in the neck from my group? You know, he's Tory. No, he's the mayor. And the point is, when you're the mayor, you are not, yes, you have a political allegiance, but you're sitting there on behalf of us and on behalf of the residents of Swale. And Colin very much did that. And I wasn't too bad, actually. It was a bit nippy in that church, but it did go pretty well. Because it did mean that the following mayor said, well, you went there for him, you've got to come somewhere with us, which was even worse, but that's another story. That was even worse, getting it in the net from my group. But no, Colin really did make a huge contribution to this council when he was here. And I did, when we had our little break just then, Colin was the one who set up what we used to call the planning subgroup, which Councillor Henderson spoke about. And it was up to the chair of planning to call that subgroup to discuss matters, not strategic necessarily, but issue-wide. And I know when I chaired one of the scrutiny committees that we did report to that planning subgroup on the big flooding report that we did. So it's not like, oh, that's cabinet and that's committee. It did work. It did work. If people are willing, things can work very well cross-party, cross-council. And Colin very much took that view, that it's about doing the best for our residents. And if that means that we have to set up another meeting because your committee, Environment Scrutiny, wanted to present something, then so he did. So yes, he will be sadly missed. He had an all-round, which people don't seem to have these days, an all-round awareness of things in the community. And as I say, he was very collegiate and pragmatic, and there was no political dogma whatsoever. I could have missed it, of course, but not from where I was sitting. So yeah, he will be sadly missed, and I do feel for Pam, and I hope things go well in the future. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. I'd like to invite the leader of the Conservative group to pay tribute to former councillor Lind Taylor, who sadly passed away recently.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This responsibility, I ask that we pass to Cameron Beard, Councillor Beard. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beard, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We've just heard tributes about someone who spent 27 years in this chamber. Lind was only here for a year, but the impact he made was quite tremendous. He was elected at a by-election that was caused by a member of our group resigning, and we had to, as with any by-election, certainly a year before all-out elections, you don't take them for granted. It was a hard-fought campaign, and Lind was a superb campaigner. He wanted to be out every minute on the doorstep. And it was the same at the 2019 elections, when if we had a canvassing session, he was there without fail. Lind has came onto this council, and at his very first group meeting, he started putting his hand up for every single job that was available. And someone had to lean across to him and say, you want to hedge your bets here and go for something that you want to do, not just end up on everything. What he ended up on was scrutiny, and he absolutely loved it. He spent a long time on the scrutiny committee in his year here. He got involved in task and finish groups. He was what you want from a councillor, a ward councillor. He was there for his residents. After leaving the council, he still remained involved in the local community. He was a founding member of the Walden Bay Residents Association. He was a chairman of the Big Local. He was a trustee of the Eastern Sheppey Community Hub, which he reeled me into. He fought for that because he heard that the police were disposing of the police station in Laysdown and property developers were already sniffing around. So he got it registered as a community asset and then arranged for it to be purchased off of the police to be kept as a community building. And at the moment, we're currently going through the process of getting the works done to be able to make that a rentable space. Lind will be sadly missed on Sheppey. He was a good friend, more than a councillor, he was a good friend to us. It's been a hard year.
Thank you, Councillor Burt. And Councillor Bowen would like to say something, I think.
Try that again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to be brief, actually, with your permission, talk very briefly about both Colin and Lind. Colin first. I've had the privilege since I've been in this chamber to sit and watch present company, excluded also a lot of mayors control the council meetings, and two for me stand out in all of the time. One was, and sadly both are now no longer with us. One was Councillor Ingham, who just loved the role, and the second one was Colin, who was the most passionate person that I think I've ever seen sit in that role, and his dedication to being mayor was evident when he stood down as being mayor at the end of his second term, and the amount of money which he raised for his charity, and you could see the emotion and hear the emotion when he spoke about it. He cared deeply for Swale, he cared deeply about the Borough Council, and he cared very deeply about the role of mayor, and he will be missed. In terms of Lind, as Councillor has just said, a short time on the council, and I had the great privilege of working with him on scrutiny committee, and he was just into absolutely everything. He wanted to know about the lot. I was never afraid to ask any questions and look for answers, and that is something which we all should be trying to do, and hopefully those who worked with him on here will take something and remember a bit about what the type of person which he was, because he was he was a gentleman and a scholar, and without a bad bone in his body, would only look for the positives and things, and would just want to make things better, which is the perfect person you want on things like scrutiny committee. They both will be sorely missed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowen. I'd now like to invite the leader to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think the two members have talked about Councillor Taylor much better than I can. He was, as you said, only here for 1 year. I didn't know him very well. I do remember the by-election very well because it was hard fought and extremely disappointing outcome. But he obviously was a good campaigner. And if you will, I'd just like to pass on my condolences and the condolences of everybody in the coalition to his family. Thank you.
There will be a minute's silence in memory of former councillor and Mayor of Swale, Honorary Alderman Colin Prescott, and the former councillor Lind Taylor. We will continue with agenda item number 1, emergency evacuation procedure. There is no scheduled test of the fire alarm, and if the alarm does sound, please leave the building quickly using the doors signed as fire escapes and assemble in the car park at the front of the building and await instructions. If there is anyone in attendance that might require assistance in evacuating the building, please make themselves known. Thank you, Councillor. Agenda item number 2, apologies for absence. I'd like to invite the monitoring officer to give apologies.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's actually the Chief Executive that will be doing that. I've received apologies from Councillor Derek Carnell, Councillor Roger Clark, Councillor Ken Pugh, Councillor James Hall, Councillor Ken Ingleton and Councillor Elliot Jays are attending the meeting remotely and will not be eligible to vote. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any others? No. Thank you. Agenda item 3 is the minutes. Do members approve the minutes of the council meeting held on the 10th of November 2021, minutes numbers 413 to 424 as correct record? All agreed? Thank you. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. Do any members have any interest to declare? Thank you. Mayor's announcements. I'm not going to go through every single one of them because it's been since November and things have picked up nicely for the Mayor. But there are a few that I would just like to mention. I attended several Christmas functions with local charities and also held my own fundraising event at Lloyd's Wharf, Sittingbourne, where we actually managed to raise £150. This was at the Raybell Barge Museum, a project with the support of the Sheppey Matters. It was supported by Sheppey Matters. It was decorated with lanterns made by local school children from used plastic bottles. We made £150 for the Mayor Charities, which I was pleased about. And during this time, Sittingbourne has now 3 new vicars. 2 at our Holy Trinity churches in Sittingbourne and Milton, and 1 at St Michael's Church, Sittingbourne. And I welcomed Reverend David, Reverend Colin, and Reverend Robert at the licensing ceremony. There were two events that I attended for Kent Wildlife Rescue, which included a very special, I'm going to say, cuddle here from Sarah, the Lady Mayor, Madam Mayor, from Peter the Fox, who are our very own Swale Fox ambassador, and she said she really loved it. There you go. Finally, I was honoured to meet His Royal Highness the Princess of Wales and the Duchess of Cornwall when they visited Sheppey Matters, who are celebrating their 30th anniversary in February. It was the highlight of my term, I can assure you, as Mayor. Thank you. Okay. With so many important items to discuss this evening, I'm reordering the agenda, bringing forward those items that have budget implications first. The budget and fees and charges items are essentially one item and need to be considered in conjunction with each other. However, as we have always treated them as separate in Swale, we will continue to do so this evening. But I'm going to reverse the order so that after the council tax support scheme has been discussed, fees and charges will be discussed next. Have you understood that? Good. Okay, item agenda 11, the council tax support scheme 2022/23. And I would like to invite the leader to introduce and report and propose recommendations.
And thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council tax support scheme replaced council tax benefit in 2013. Though there was government support in the initial phase, that has steadily diminished. The support scheme is intended to ensure that those on low incomes contribute something to the local councils that they live in. And not too surprisingly, Swale has the second highest demand in Kent for support. For 2021, we reduced the contribution from 25% to 20%, and that is in line with most others in Kent. Given we have some of the poorest people in Kent, an above average levy is perverse. We did so out of fairness, but also because collection at 25% became difficult and sometimes futile. We will work towards a more banded system for 23-24. But for now, I ask Council to maintain the 80% support and approve the investigation into a banded system thereafter. Mr. Mayor, I propose, and I believe I have a seconder.
Thank you, Leader. And I'd like to invite Councillor Angela Harrison to second the recommendation and ask whether you wish to speak now as seconder or reserve your right to speak.
I'll second and reserve my right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. I would like to invite Councillor Horton to speak, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Leader and Councillor Harrison, for proposing this paper and seconding it. I was going to pick up, thank you, Leader, on agenda item 2.9, which mentions a banded scheme and says it should be considered for the 2023-24 year. It seems to me that that's a very sensible approach, but I thought the way it was written made it sound as if it was going to be done rather than more than just investigate the implementation of a banded scheme. But I am supportive of that. It is clear that in our community we have people who struggle daily to meet the bills, and there comes a point at which some bill cannot get paid, and we then extend a tremendous amount of effort in trying to get what turns out to be a very little return from people who really can't make that contribution, and that isn't fair. On that note, I would just like to draw members' attentions to section 2.6, which recognises the contribution that is made by Kent finance officers to a pool which allows for the administration of this scheme. We are beneficiaries of that scheme, more so perhaps than most, and I am grateful for that support. I am very comfortable in offering my support behind this paper, and I urge Council to do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Horton, and I'd now like to open this to the members for debate. Councillor Harrison, as you reserved the right to speak, do you wish to speak now?
Well, all I will say, Mr. Mayor, is that obviously I welcome this, and in the investigation of the implementation of a banded council tax support scheme for 23-24 will be one of the first things which the new Policy and Resources Committee can look at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. This will be a recorded vote. I will ask each member in attendance to state their vote in alphabetical order. Councillor Baldock.
Agreed.
Councillor Beart.
Agreed.
Councillor Bonney.
Agreed.
Councillor Bowen.
Agreed.
Mr. Derek Carnell, Clark. Councillor Simon Clark.
Agreed.
Councillor Darby.
Agreed.
Councillor Davey.
Agreed.
Councillor Dendor.